What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today I'm going to be giving you the 5 most important tips for layering in street photography. Now, this is a technique that I've mastered over the past decade of traveling the world, practicing my street photography, and I'm really eager to share with you these tips today because I believe that ultimately photography is very simple. A photograph is a result of where you position your physical body in relationship to the subject and the background, and ultimately when it comes down to it, the art of layering is very simple, and I want to break it down with you because I find that people complicate this idea of layering and maybe think about layering as something that is very complex, but it's very fundamental in the realm of photography and very simple. And so my first tip for you is to master foreground, middle ground, and background, where ultimately you want to guide the viewer's eye through these 3 different planes. And so a lot of the times it's best to work the scene from background to the foreground. And so here in Mumbai, India, as I was photographing at this scene, I set my stage. So the priority for me was to find the anchor point and to find my background firstly. And so I was using this window frame and this beautiful brick wall here, or this stone wall here, as my stage, as my background, working from back to front. I sensed the possibility of a photograph here as I forced my luck at this scene. I recognized the pattern of the bird that was flying throughout the background of the frame and waiting for that decisive moment. And so luck isn't random. You must sense the possibility of a potential photograph at these different scenes. And so my first layer within this scene here was setting the stage and finding an anchor. I used that window frame on the left-hand side that's highlighted in blue to position that man in the window frame as my anchor point. And so I position my body in relationship to that window and that man. And then I have my beautiful stage here using the geometry, using the shapes, and then filling the rest of the frame. And so my second layer was to fill the foreground. And so I waited and watched as people moved in and out of the scene and positioned themselves in the foreground of my frame, putting those subjects on the right-hand side in the foreground. And then finally, with the third layer, I simply waited for the decisive moment. I sensed the possibility of this occurring. I was patient and observant of the patterns of the birds in flight and used that empty window frame as another element within my composition to create this dynamic and layered scene. And so now we have a visual feast where the frame is filled, and it came through me working from back to front. And this is a technique that I use time and time again. And so you want to, for tip number 2, you want to position yourself strategically. You want to use choke points. For instance, here at this bus stop in Philadelphia, I find that it's a beautiful choke point as there's many different planes to work with from the foreground, middle ground, and background, as we have people waiting at the bus, people moving in and out, coming off of the bus, and it's just a good choke point for me to position myself to make a potential layered photograph. And so essentially through micro adjustments with my physical body at this choke point, I was able to position myself strategically in relationship to this scene. And so ultimately photography is visual problem solving. And what that means is you must be aware of the different elements within the potential scene that you're photographing and put order to the chaos in your frame. And so the first layer that I noticed when I approached this bus stop was the light and shadow play. And so I positioned my body in relationship to that beam of light in the foreground, in relationship to that signpost in the background. Very similar to the way in which I worked the scene in Mumbai with the bird. I positioned that sign there strategically as an anchor point in the background, using an inanimate object as my anchor point this time. Secondly, I position myself close to the bus stop to fill the foreground. And so a lot of the best layered photographs have impact in the foreground by filling the frame at a close proximity, using that silhouette as a striking visual element to fill the foreground. And then thirdly, I waited for the subject to enter the light in the middle ground of my frame. And again, this is me recognizing the patterns of human behavior and light itself, watching as people move in and out of the middle ground of the frame and putting order to this chaotic scene. And then ultimately coming together with this composition, I made it very simple. I simply positioned myself in a place where I know that different things could potentially align. And so my third tip for you is to engage with your subjects. Don't be invisible. It's really important for me to go out there and explore the world openly. And here in Napoli, I spent about 2 hours at this scene, and I was swimming, sunbathing. I was on a vacation with my brother, and by engaging with the subjects at the scene, I gained permission by simply being there and being present and ultimately came home with a compelling photograph. And so when we're making these layered compositions, we want to fill the frame and create a visual feast. And what that means is you want the foreground, middle ground, and background to be filled with something that's visually and emotionally impactful and interesting, stripping away all of the superfluous details and making sure that you focus in what truly matters within your frame. The best layered photographs aren't necessarily combining a million different things and a million different complex layers, but you have three simple elements sometimes that make something very strong and visually engaging. And so my first layer in this scene is very similar to the way I work the other scenes. I position my body in relationship to the background, to the swimmer, my anchor. Actually, if I come back here and show you this context sheet, you can see as I'm trying to position my body in relationship from the action in the foreground to the swimmer in the background. And so by filling my frame in the background and using that swimmer as an anchor point, I was able to make those micro adjustments with my physical body in relationship to that swimmer. And then finally, I filled the foreground and the middle ground with the action, with the content, with the subject, with the people engaging with the watermelon in this scene. And this came naturally through positioning my physical body in relationship to that anchor. And so I highly encourage you to find an anchor, find a static subject, find somebody in the background, position yourself in relationship to the subject and the background, and ultimately you can connect these different elements to create these layered frames. And then the beauty of this composition in this photograph, is the simple fact that all of these elements come together naturally. It's not something you really force. I'm not looking at the watermelon as a triangle. I'm not looking at the composition as a rule of third, but I'm looking at life in front of me and positioning myself in relationship to the moment. And then these different elements come together naturally, creating this spiral composition, creating this filled frame. And this to me is the art of layering. It's not about looking at life so rigidly and rationally, but very much physically responding to the life in front of you. And so, tip number 4, embrace chaos and serendipity. And so I find that a lot of these dynamic scenes where things are out of your control are gold mines for street photography. And so here at this scene, I was climbing the mountain in Wadi Kelt in Jericho. And as this car broke down, I hopped out of the car and I responded quickly at the scene. And so in this case, I layered with purpose. I was looking for the missing piece to the visual puzzle. As you can see in this context sheet, I initially began making a photograph that was a bit flat, as we only have the car in the middle ground without a foreground element. However, through recognizing the different relationships I could make between the foreground and the background, using that car as a visual element, I was able to find that missing piece to the visual puzzle. And again, this comes through embracing chaos, embracing serendipity and chance, and putting together the foreground, middle ground, and background on my toes, responding quickly. And this is something that you're going to have to hone in on when you're out there on the streets, as life is out of your control. And you're not going to always be able to simply set your stage every single time, but respond quickly in that fleeting moment. And so this is an example of me working from front to back. And so my first layer was filling the foreground first with intention. And so I made that decision of including the car in the foreground to create layers and depth to this composition, filling the foreground, the 1/3 of the frame. Secondly, I plugged the subjects in the middle of the frame. A very simple decision, but it really went a long way as it helps tell the visual story of the car. And then finally, we have the background with the blue sky. And so when you connect all these three elements, you can see right here in this drawing, it's very simple. 1, 2, 3, foreground, middle ground, background, car, subject, sky, right? I'm working from front to back here. I'm making these different relationships and solving this visual puzzle very quickly. And so you must be aware of these different elements in front of you and make sense of the chaos, make sense of it through spontaneity and the serendipity. And then you're there and you're prepared with your camera making these decisions on the fly. And so this is the result of the photograph. And so tip number 5, trust your intuition and be patient, right? We're layering. It's not just a technique, right? It's something that you kind of have to become in tune with through sensing and feeling the possibility of a potential photograph. You have to approach life and approach these different scenes and wait for it. You have to anticipate these moments and let your intuition do the work. As much as you can see and perceive these different elements in front of you, one must respond with their gut, with their intuition, when they press the shutter. And so I'm going to share with you a behind the scenes video of this scene here from Mexico City as I climb the top of the mountain, and you can listen to my voice and listen to what I say out loud. I recognize the potential of relating a subject to that sculpture of Jesus in the background. Very similar to the first video example we looked at from Mumbai. I looked at the bird in flight and I knew that I could include that in my photograph. And so these lucky spontaneous moments and these relationships I make through these layered frames are something that comes through not only observational awareness, but being patient and anticipating these moments through my intuition. And here we go, going to the behind the scenes video at the scene.
Hey.
Bro. Hola, bro. Estamos, ¿sí o no?
Wow.
La foto. La foto, mira. El aeropuerto.
Beautiful.
Aeropuerto chulo. Así, mira, así. Sácamela así.
Wow. Yeah, building.
Casa. Ven, sácame foto. Sí.
I'll go up. I'm going.
Las escaleras.
Dude, it's sketchy. Whoa. Dude, Matthew, you gotta come up here. If you get the guy in the right spot, you can get Jesus in the guys.
México, así te puro Cruz Azul. Aquí, fíjate, ve. México. Mira, México, Cruz Azul. México, Cruz Azul. ¡Ey! ¡Puro Cruz Azul!
Oh!
¡Puro Cruz Azul! ¡Puro Cruz Azul! Ya.
Sorry.
México, puro Cruz Azul.
Bro, gracias.
All right, so as you could see at this scene as it unfolded, I engage with the subjects, right, using one of those tips. This is a real world example. This is what I truly do when I'm out there in the world, you know. I'm not necessarily always, you know, just this fly on the wall, but I engage with the scene and the people that I photograph and then become this fly on the wall and simply observe people and make pictures and create these layered frames by setting my stage, right? So as I climbed this ladder, I sensed the possibility of a photograph. You know, I was surprised when I saw that sculpture of Jesus. I could see it from when I was down low, and I was thinking to myself out loud, and you heard me speak out loud, you know, I could make these relationships between that sculpture of Jesus and the subjects, and there was something here, you know, I could view that beautiful storm cloud rolling in from the background on the right-hand side from the mountains, and this gritty scene of this construction site was a beautiful stage to work with. And so the first thing that I did was simply set my stage. I positioned my physical body in relationship to that sculpture of Jesus as my visual thing that I was interested in, and then waited for my subjects to come into the frame. And so that's the second layer, right? We have the outstretched arms of this man in relationship to the outstretched arms of Jesus. Another lucky moment, but this is something that came through me recognizing the potential of a photograph. And so you must feel the potential of a photograph. And then the dog swoops by, and then everything kind of connects here, and it's a very spontaneous moment, but by embracing the chaos, you can put order to it through recognizing these different patterns and recognizing where you must position your physical body in relationship to the subject and the background. And then all of these different elements connect very naturally, right? This is something that comes through time spent practicing, working the scene, filling the frame with something visually interesting, where you're not going to go out there and make these layered frames with just one click of the shutter, but you're going to have to work that scene. A lot of the times, I don't leave the scene until the scene leaves me. And so my final thoughts here to wrap things up, I'll give you the 5 tips. Master the foreground, middle ground, and background. Tip number 2, position yourself strategically. Tip number 3, engage with your subjects. Tip number 4, embrace chaos and serendipity. And tip number 5, trust your intuition and be patient. And remember, photography is like visual problem solving, and it's up to the photographer to make these decisions on the fly, in the moment, with their gut, with their intuition, by positioning your physical body in relationship to the subject and the background. And then naturally you will fill the frame through positioning yourself in a place where you can sense the possibility of a photograph, finding an anchor point, finding a subject or something static, finding something in the background or something visually interesting, and then making these relationships naturally on the fly through positioning yourself in relationship to that visual interest or that subject or that anchor. Right? And so you must see the world with all of its complexities, where life isn't flat, but life is in layers and it is complex. But we're not making layered photographs simply for the sake of layering photographs. We're not going out there and trying to make complex frames for the sake of making complex frames. But we're simply using our ability to create depth and layers through compositional techniques. We're simply applying this knowledge and this information that I'm giving you here in this video out there in the streets for you to create something more visually impactful, right? I don't want you to go out there and just put together a million different things in a frame and try to make something complex for the sake of making something complex. But I want you to take these real world examples and ideas and apply it to your photography to hopefully create more visually impactful photographs, because I find the best photographs are close. The best photographs have filled frames. And through working the scene and using some of these tips, I believe that you can come home with something. And, this is going to take a lot of practice and a lot of time spent out there in the streets and shooting more photographs. But I hope that through sharing some of these behind the scenes videos, some of these contact sheets and ideas, you now have a better understanding of how to layer in the streets. And so, take some of this advice and apply it in the real world. That's the only way that you're going to learn. No amount of studying photo books or watching these videos are going to help you. You really have to go out there and do the thing. And so, with all that being said, thank you for watching today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.